My name is Cindy G. LeCuyer, and I was 6 hours into a double shift on Christmas Eve when my 13-year-old daughter texted me, "Grandma said I can't stay. I'm leaving now." At first, I stared at my phone like I'd misread it. I waited for the follow-up message that would explain it away, a correction, a joke, anything. Nothing came. Just that sentence, sitting there quietly, like it didn't understand how much damage it carried. I called her immediately. When she picked up, her voice was calm in the way kids get when they're trying not to fall apart. She didn't cry. She just told me they kicked her out. The plan had been simple. Leia would go to my parents' house early, like she always did. We'd done it that way the last 3 Christmases since my divorce. I'd meet them there after my shift, which was supposed to end just after midnight, unless something catastrophic happened. In my line of work, catastrophe is always on the schedule, but Christmas Eve hits differently when you know your child is supposed to be sitting at a warm table, feeling included, feeling safe. Instead, she was told there was no room for her. That's what my mother said. She told Leia they hadn't counted on her being there since I wasn't coming yet, said the table was already full with my brother's kids and his wife's parents, said it would be better if she went home now to avoid awkwardness. My dad didn't stop it. My brother didn't say a word. Leia had driven herself there in the used sedan I bought her after she got her learner's permit last summer. She's careful, cautious, smarter than she should have to be at 13. She got back in that car with shaking hands and drove home alone. When she arrived, the house was dark. No lights, no smells of dinner, no music, just silence. She microwaved leftover spaghetti, texted me that she was fine, and curled up on the couch with a blanket and her laptop. She watched Home Alone and said later, "Might as well make it accurate." I got off my shift at 3:15 in the morning and drove home, running on fumes. I hadn't eaten all day, but I didn't feel hunger. I walked into the house and saw her asleep on the couch, still in her Christmas sweater, with the little embroidered gingerbread men she picked out herself. There was a half-drunk cup of hot chocolate on the table, and a plate of cookies she'd brought for everyone. She brought them back because no one wanted them. I sat beside her and watched her sleep for a while. She looked small again, curled up tight like she was bracing even in rest. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't call anyone. I decided something instead. And the next morning, while everyone else was probably still digesting their turkey and pretending nothing had happened, I got dressed and drove across town. When I walked into my parents' house that morning, it felt like stepping onto a stage set after the audience had left. The tree lights were still on, blinking cheerfully like nothing had gone wrong. Christmas music played softly from a speaker in the corner. My mom was arranging leftover pies on decorative plates as if presentation could undo cruelty. My brother was stretched out on the couch in flannel pants, his kids on the floor tearing through the last of their gifts. His wife scrolled on her phone, half awake, wrapped in a throw blanket. No one expected me. The room went still the moment I shut the door behind me. My dad came in from the hallway holding a mug of coffee and looked at me with mild confusion, like I was the disruption, not the consequence. He asked what I was doing there. I told him we needed to talk about last night, about how my 13-year-old daughter had been told there was no room for her and sent home alone on Christmas Eve while the rest of the family stayed and celebrated. He immediately told me not to make a scene, said the kids were present, said this wasn't the time or place. That's when I realized he still didn't understand what had happened. None of them did. They truly thought I would swallow it and move on. I asked my mom to explain what made her think it was acceptable to tell Leia she couldn't stay. She didn't even pause. She said it wasn't a big deal, that they didn't know Leia was coming since I wasn't there yet, that they'd only planned for a certain number of seats and didn't want to rearrange everything last minute. She said it would have been awkward with me not there. Then she added that it was probably more comfortable for Leia to be at home anyway. More comfortable. Like being alone in the dark on Christmas Eve was a favor. I turned to my brother. He shrugged and said he figured it was something between me and Mom, that he didn't want to get involved. He didn't even look up from his phone. He sat there like he was waiting for me to finish, so he could go back to coffee and football. I looked around the room and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, not even disappointment anymore, but a cold, sharp clarity. I told them Leia cried herself to sleep in an empty house. I told them she watched Christmas movies alone while her family pretended she didn't exist. My mom shifted uncomfortably. My brother avoided my eyes. Then my dad said something I will carry with me forever. He said, "She's not really part of this family the same way. She's your daughter, not ours." I didn't think. I didn't plan it. My hand moved before my brain caught up. The sound of the slap was louder than I expected. My brother's kids froze. His wife sat upright. My dad stood there stunned, one hand on his cheek. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I told them if they couldn't treat my daughter like family, then they weren't mine either. I told them I was done helping, done fixing, done making their lives easier while they made my child feel disposable. I walked out before anyone could respond. I drove home and found Laya still asleep on the couch. I made pancakes, left her a note, and sat on the porch watching the sun come up. Somewhere across town, they were probably trying to figure out what had just happened. They didn't know it yet, but they'd lost the only person who'd been holding everything together for years. That afternoon, after Laya went back to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a notebook and did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I added things up. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just factually. Every payment, every favor, every time I'd stepped in quietly so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. I started with the SUV my parents were driving, the one I bought after my dad's hip replacement because their old car wasn't safe anymore. He'd asked if I could help with the down payment. I'd said yes without hesitation, then kept it in my name and let them use it like it belonged to them. I paid the insurance. I paid the maintenance. I even bought new snow tires last winter without mentioning it. Then there was the house. 2 years ago, they refinanced and couldn't qualify on their own because of their credit. They begged me to co-sign for a small renovation. Just a sunroom, my mom said. A peaceful place to enjoy their golden years. The monthly payment wasn't huge, but whenever they came up short, my phone rang. I covered the difference without keeping track. Property taxes every spring. My dad's emergency dental surgery last year. New phones when they couldn't figure out how to update the old ones. My mom's credit card balance when she panicked after buying home exercise equipment she never used. All of it flowed from me to them so seamlessly that it had started to feel normal. And yet, when it mattered most, they looked at my child and decided she was optional. The next morning, I didn't hesitate. I drove to their house, parked in the driveway, and walked straight up to the door. My mom answered with a hopeful look, like she thought I was there to make peace. She asked if I wanted to come in and talk. I told her I wanted the SUV keys. She blinked, laughed nervously, said she didn't understand. I repeated myself. She told me I couldn't be serious. I told her the car wasn't hers and never had been. If they could decide who counted as family based on convenience, then so could I. She tried to turn it into guilt, asked how I could punish them over one misunderstanding. I didn't argue. I stepped past her, walked into the kitchen, and opened the drawer by the fridge where they always kept the keys. They were right there, next to an old deck of cards and a broken remote. My brother was on the couch again, same spot, pretending to be busy on his phone. He didn't say a word. His wife glanced at me, then looked away. My dad came in from the backyard just as I was walking out with the keys. He asked what I thought I was doing. I told him I was taking back what was mine. He said I was being cruel, that I was making a scene, that this wasn't what I should be teaching Laya. I stopped and turned to face him. I told him I was teaching Laya that she never had to keep giving parts of herself to people who treated her like a problem, that love without respect is nothing. That family isn't a contract, it's a choice, and they had made theirs. Then I left. I drove the SUV straight to my mechanic, told him to change the locks, re-register it under my address, and do a full maintenance check. That night, I parked it next to my own car and felt something settle inside me that hadn't been there before. Control. When I got home, I logged into the joint loan account for their renovation and called the bank. I told them I was removing myself from the loan. They asked if I was sure. I told them I was done being responsible for people who weren't responsible for my child. 2 days later, the contractor emailed to say the work on the sunroom had stopped. I canceled the auto pay for their property taxes and let the silence stretch. They wanted to pretend my daughter didn't exist. Fine, let them see what life looked like without the person who'd been cushioning every fall. By the time January settled in, the silence had taken on weight. It wasn't peaceful yet, but it was different, like a room after a storm where you can finally hear yourself think. My parents didn't call. My brother didn't text. For the first time in years, no one was asking me to fix a printer, explain a bill, or cover a shortfall. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The first crack came through a forwarded message from my mom. She didn't add commentary, just sent screenshots. My brother had been telling extended family that I orchestrated the whole thing, that I'd sent Laya early on purpose, knowing she'd be turned away. that I wanted to punish our parents for things they'd said during my divorce years ago. He said I'd used my daughter to make a point, that I was manipulative, dramatic, and vindictive. Reading it didn't make me angry. It made me tired in a way that reached my bones. I understood then that this wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about control. When people lose access, they rewrite history to justify it. I didn't argue with him. I didn't defend myself in group chats. I didn't correct the narrative. I texted him 2 words, "We're done," and blocked his number. Then I blocked his wife. Then my cousins, who chimed in with variations of "family is family," and "you'll regret this." I wasn't interested in persuading anyone. I was building something smaller and stronger now, and there wasn't room for people who needed my child to be collateral damage to feel right. A few days later, my parents showed up at my door together. I stepped outside and closed it behind me. My mom looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from realizing comfort has been confused for love. She said they'd made a terrible mistake, that Christmas had been stressful, and they'd taken it out on the wrong person. She said they didn't think I'd actually walk away. Then my dad spoke, and it stopped me cold. He apologized, not a half apology, not a defense wrapped in regret. He said what they did to Laya was cruel and unforgivable. He said he didn't know how to undo it, but he was willing to live with the consequences if it meant not hurting her again. I told them I forgave them, but I wouldn't be returning to the old arrangement. No money, no favors, no automatic access. That version of me was gone. They nodded. They didn't argue. That was the part that hurt the most and healed the fastest all at once. That night after they left, Leia asked if Uncle Jake hated us now. I told her maybe he never really knew us. She nodded like she'd already decided something on her own. The house felt quieter after that. Not empty, just clear. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like protection. The days after that settled into something I didn't recognize at first. Calm. Not the fragile kind that feels like it might shatter if someone raises their voice, but the steady kind that holds. Leia and I fell into a rhythm that wasn't built around anticipation or dread. No waiting for invitations that might be revoked. No bracing for awkward explanations. Just mornings, school, work, evenings that belonged to us. We stayed in pajamas more than we should have. We cooked simple meals. We laughed at things that weren't that funny, just because laughing felt safe again. A few days later, my mom sent an email. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't defensive. It was careful, measured, almost respectful. She thanked me for hearing them out on the porch and said they understood the relationship had changed. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for visits. She asked for one thing. If they could send Laya a birthday card in March. No dinner, no phone call, just a card. I read it twice. It didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like someone testing the edge of a boundary to see if it would hold. I replied yes, but told her they weren't to call or visit. Not yet, that I would know when Laya was ready. She agreed without pushing. Then something unexpected happened. An envelope showed up in the mailbox with no return address, my name written in my dad's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter, 3 short paragraphs written slowly, like he'd taken his time with every word. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He wrote about his own childhood, about growing up in a house where children were expected to adapt to adults, where silence mattered more than feelings, where love was conditional and unspoken. He admitted he thought he'd done better, thought he'd grown past it, and realized too late that he hadn't. He wrote that watching me walk away and take everything with me, the car, the financial support, the role I'd quietly filled for years, forced him to see how much they'd relied on my patience without earning it. He said he missed Laya and knew he didn't deserve to hear from her. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw the letter away either. Some things don't need answers. Some things just need to be acknowledged quietly. That weekend, Laya and I cleaned out the garage together. We built 2 raised garden beds from a kit I'd ordered months earlier and never opened. She picked tomatoes, strawberries, and sugar snap peas. I picked sunflowers and lavender. We worked side by side, dirt under our nails, music playing softly from her phone. When we finished, she stood back and said the backyard finally felt like ours. Later that evening, she asked if she could talk to them one day. Just talk, nothing big. I said yes, but only on our terms. The call happened the next weekend, 10 minutes on speaker. My mom's voice cracked when Leia said hello. My dad mostly listened. Leia told them about the garden and how the tomatoes were already sprouting. That was it. When the call ended, she didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just shrugged and went back to her playlist. That's when I knew something important had shifted. She wasn't waiting for them anymore. March came quietly. Gray skies, early signs of spring. Leia turned 14 on a Saturday and asked for Thai food and a homemade cake instead of a party. We did exactly that. The card from my parents arrived a few days later. Plain white envelope. Sunflowers on the front. I let Leia decide when to open it. She waited until the morning after her birthday, read it silently, folded it once, and slid it into the drawer where she keeps movie stubs and little pieces of her life. She said, "That's nice," and went back to her breakfast. The last surprise came weeks later. Another envelope, this time just a photograph. Leia at 6, sitting on my dad's shoulders at a park, both of them laughing. No note, no explanation. I put it in a drawer. Some memories belong to the past, some lessons belong to the future. It's been months now. The garden is thriving. The fence we painted still stands. Leia made honor roll and signed up for debate club because she said she's tired of staying quiet when things don't feel right. I told her I was proud of her and meant it more than she'll ever know. The house feels lighter, smaller, stronger. People ask if I'll ever go back to how things were. I tell them no. Not because I'm angry, not because I can't forgive, but because forgiveness doesn't mean access, and family isn't who shares your last name. Family is who makes room at the table without being asked. Spring settled in quietly, the way real change usually does. No announcements, no dramatic confrontations, just the steady proof that the world keeps moving, even when you stop performing for it. The garden took off faster than I expected. The tomatoes climbed their stakes, the sunflowers stretched taller than Laya's bedroom window, and the lavender smelled like calm whenever the wind picked up. We spent more time outside than we ever had before, partly because it felt good and partly because it reminded us that we were building something that belonged only to us. The absence of constant family noise became noticeable in small ways. No texts asking if I could just take a look at a billing issue. No phone calls framed as emergencies that somehow always ended with me paying for something. No guilt-laced reminders about holidays or traditions that only worked if I stayed quiet. For the first time in years, my mental energy wasn't divided among 5 different adult problems that weren't mine to solve. I slept better, I laughed more easily, I felt lighter in a way I didn't realize I'd been missing. Leia changed too, though hers was quieter. She stopped asking if we were going to my parents' house for random weekends. She stopped rehearsing what she might say if someone made a comment about family. When school forms asked for emergency contacts, she didn't hesitate before writing down my name twice. One afternoon, while we were planting the last row of peas, she said something that caught me off guard. She said, "I don't feel like I have to earn being wanted anymore." I didn't respond right away because my throat closed up. Some victories don't come with applause. They come with relief. My parents stayed at a distance, and for once, that distance held. They sent the birthday card. They sent one short email in April asking how the garden was doing. I replied with a photo of the sunflowers and nothing else. No invitation, no updates beyond what was safe to share. They didn't push. I think they finally understood that this wasn't a phase or a punishment. It was a permanent shift. Access now required care. The one person who never adjusted was my brother. He stayed blocked, and that decision proved itself over and over again. A cousin mentioned he'd been telling people I'd lost my mind after the divorce, that I'd always been dramatic, that Leia was turning into a problem because I encouraged her independence. Hearing it secondhand didn't sting the way it once would have. It just confirmed I'd made the right choice. Anyone willing to rewrite a child's pain to protect their ego doesn't deserve proximity. By early summer, the fence around the garden had faded slightly in the sun, the pale green and navy blending into something softer. Leia repainted a section one afternoon without telling me, adding tiny dots of yellow between the boards. When I asked why, she shrugged and said, "So it doesn't feel like a wall, just a line." That was when I realized she understood boundaries better than most adults I knew. Not to keep people out, but to keep herself safe. One evening in June, after dinner, we sat on the bench inside the garden, listening to music drift from her phone. She asked if I regretted slapping my dad. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told her I didn't regret standing up for her, but I didn't want anger to be the thing she learned from that moment. I wanted her to remember what came after instead. The boundaries, the calm, the refusal to keep giving when it hurt. She nodded like that made sense. The last message I ever got from my parents came in late July. It was from my dad. One sentence. Thank you for letting us stay in the background. I didn't reply, but I saved it. Not as permission, not as forgiveness, just as acknowledgement that they finally understood where they stood. Life didn't become perfect. There were still hard days, awkward questions from strangers, moments when old habits tried to creep back in. But the difference was this. I no longer doubted myself when I chose my child. I no longer explained my boundaries like they were negotiable. I no longer confused love with endurance. On the first cool morning of fall, Laia and I harvested the last tomatoes. She lined them up on the counter and said we should make soup. We did, and while it simmered, she asked if she could invite a friend over for dinner. Of course, I said. When her friend arrived, I set an extra place at the table without thinking. Watching them laugh and eat and feel at ease, I felt something settle deep in my chest. There was room. There had always been room. We just stopped giving it to people who couldn't see it.